U.S. imports over half of its copper needs, and it wouldn't be a quick fix to immediately replace any of that anytime soon.
Yeah, it's not going to happen overnight, I understand. And, the suppliers, where the U.S. gets its copper from, Chile, Canada, and Mexico, these were the top suppliers. But what about China? It doesn't even make the top 5.
So there's a difference between copper in the ground, the ore, and there's a difference in the refined copper. So China has built an amazing amount of processing capacity for copper. So that is where there's the glut, is in the actual processed refined copper. But in the ore from the ground, of course, they don't really have much of it. So that's the distinction. And then there's the communication from the White House covers really all copper. So it covers all of the different iterations of copper. And I think where you could see the best progress in replacing imports would be on the downstream. And that's where it maybe makes the most sense. But again, it wouldn't happen overnight, maybe copper wire, copper finished product, et cetera.
So I got to ask you, at least a medium term, right? I mean, we've seen a stock reaction already to the news of this probe, Freeport McMoRan, based in Phoenix, right? A lot of people are starting to like that stock. Also listed in London, Antofagasta as well. Do you have any other names that we should be watching?
So Freeport would be the biggest beneficiary, and of our coverage, that's the name with the most exposure to the CME versus the LME. So this is really just about the U.S. price for copper, and the U.S. consumes, less than 10% of all copper. But yes, the biggest beneficiary for now would, for what we understand the tariffs to possibly be, again, caveating that a bit, would be Freeport. And then to a lesser extent, you could see some benefit. I think it's about 10% for Southern Copper, which we also cover. It's a Latin American name.
Is the Trump administration sort of stretching it when they're saying that the U.S. is going to be facing a copper shortage very soon?
There's been a lot of analysis over the years talking about copper shortages. I believe in the more decade that I've looked at copper, I've heard of shortages happening every year, and it hasn't happened. So I think a couple things. One is that EV demand was part of the analysis of copper shortages that have been proliferating in the last couple of years. So EV demand, especially in the U.S., looks like it'll be smaller than expected. And then within those EVs, the copper content in the vehicles has gotten to be less than expected because of substitution. And then I think broadly, the assumption of Chinese demand is a critical way to think about copper as well. So as China's demand perhaps slows a bit, especially the property sector, you could see that copper demand assumption slow down. And then on the supply side, there has been some large projects that have moved forward and are expanding. The higher copper price, of course, is a powerful incentive, and just some really big expansions in, DRC and other countries. So there's still country risk. There's still potential for upside to demand. But I think we're seeing a pretty balanced copper market lately, and there's no reason to believe there'll be a scarcity in our view in the short term.
Timna, you were saying that when we first started this conversation that any sort of fix isn't going to happen overnight. And to the point about China, where they dominate, and correct me if I'm wrong, right, is in the processing, right? And if the Trump administration wants to attract investment and build capacity for processing at home domestically in the U.S., that's going to take years, yes?
Well, years and billions of dollars, of course. And so what we've been looking at across, steel and aluminum and copper and other commodities is that if you were to start a project now, let's say you got fast-tracked on the permitting and regulations, et cetera, you're talking about, in many cases, $2 to $4 billion investment. And by the time it's done, it will be past Trump's administration, assumedly. So that's also a challenge. How do you make that investment as a company with the uncertainty that would surely prevail once the Trump administration is passed? So I think it's pretty difficult to make those decisions. I don't envy some of the companies we follow trying to navigate these waters.